"You're the one mistake we made," my father whispered to my mother at my brother's medical school graduation party, thinking I couldn't hear him over the champagne toasts. 20 years later, as I held the Forbes magazine with my face on the cover titled, "America's Greatest Innovator," those words still echoed in my mind, but now they carried a different weight entirely. My name is Rachel Thompson, and that whispered confession would become the driving force behind everything I built. Standing in our family's elegant Boston brownstone that spring evening in 2019, surrounded by relatives celebrating my brother Michael's acceptance to Harvard Medical School, I felt the familiar sting of being the family disappointment. At 28, I had just launched my third biotech startup focusing on affordable medical devices for developing countries, work my parents considered noble but impractical compared to Michael's traditional path to surgical excellence. Have you ever been told you weren't good enough by the people who were supposed to believe in you most? If you've ever felt like the family mistake, the one who had to prove their worth over and over again, then you know exactly why this moment changed everything. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you're ready for a story about transforming whispered cruelty into world-changing innovation. The dynamics in the Thompson household had been crystal clear since childhood. My father, Dr. Robert Thompson, was chief of cardiology at Massachusetts General Hospital, while my mother, Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, ran the biomedical engineering department at MIT. They had produced one perfect child in Michael. Brilliant, focused, following the predetermined path to medical greatness. Then there was me, the daughter who asked too many uncomfortable questions, who wanted to take medicine to places it had never been before, who chose the messy uncertainty of entrepreneurship over the safety of academic achievement. Growing up, every family dinner became a performance where Michael's accomplishments took center stage while my achievements were politely acknowledged before conversation moved to more important matters. When Michael published his first research paper as an undergraduate, my parents framed it and hung it in the living room. When my first company developed a water purification device that could prevent cholera outbreaks in refugee camps, they asked when I planned to pursue something more stable. The message was unmistakable. Michael was building a legacy, while I was playing with expensive hobbies that would eventually require them to support me when reality set in. The graduation party was supposed to be a family triumph. Michael had not only been accepted to Harvard Medical School, but had also received a full scholarship and a research position with the most prestigious cardiovascular surgery program in the country. Our Beacon Hill brownstone was filled with family friends, medical colleagues, and relatives who had watched both Thompson children grow up with such high expectations. I had arrived late to the party, having flown in from Kenya where I was field testing my latest invention, a portable diagnostic device that could detect early-stage tuberculosis using artificial intelligence algorithms I had developed. The device cost less than $50 to manufacture and could save thousands of lives in regions where traditional medical infrastructure didn't exist. But as I walked through our front door, still carrying the dusty backpack from my travels, I could see in my parents' eyes that my timing was imperfect, my appearance inappropriate for their carefully orchestrated celebration. "Rachel, you made it," my mother said, her smile tight as she noticed my travel-worn clothes among the cocktail dresses and suits. "We weren't sure you'd be back in time." The subtext was clear. We weren't sure you'd prioritize family over your projects, and we're not sure it matters either way. Michael immediately embraced me, genuinely happy to see his sister, but I caught the way our parents exchanged glances, the look that said we need to manage this situation carefully. Throughout the evening, I listened to toast after toast celebrating Michael's achievements. Distinguished surgeons spoke about his research potential, family friends predicted his future Nobel Prize, and my parents glowed with the kind of pride I had never seen directed toward me. When pressed by relatives about my own work, I briefly mentioned the tuberculosis device and the potential to save lives across sub-Saharan Africa. The responses were politely encouraging, but dismissive. "That's wonderful, dear," my aunt said with a patronizing smile. "But when are you going to settle down and focus on something sustainable?" The breaking point came during a quiet moment when most guests had moved to the garden for cigars and continued celebration. I was alone in the kitchen, helping to clear dishes, when I overheard my parents talking in the adjacent study. Their voices carried clearly through the open doorway, and what I heard shattered the last remnants of hope I had been carrying for their acceptance. "Michael is everything we dreamed of," my mother was saying. "Brilliant, focused, following a path that will bring honor to our family name." There was a pause, and then my father's voice, quieter, but somehow more devastating. "You're right, he turned out perfect. Rachel, she's the one mistake we made. all that intelligence, but she insists on wasting it on these impossible projects in places that don't matter. Sometimes I wonder where we went wrong with her." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the kitchen counter, steadying myself as the full weight of their disappointment crashed over me. This wasn't just about career choices or different values. In their minds, I was fundamentally flawed, a mistake that had somehow occurred, despite their careful planning and high expectations. 28 years of trying to earn their respect, of building companies and developing technologies that could change the world, and I was still nothing more than an error in their otherwise successful parenting strategy. I finished cleaning the kitchen in mechanical silence, my mind racing through decades of subtle rejections and comparisons. Every time they had introduced Michael as our son, the future surgeon, while describing me as Rachel, who's involved in various projects. Every family photo where Michael stood between them while I was positioned slightly apart. Every Christmas dinner where his achievements were celebrated while mine were politely acknowledged before the conversation moved to more important topics. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove I was worthy of their pride, never realizing that in their minds, I was inherently defective. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I made my own quiet exit. Michael found me at the door, concerned by my sudden departure. "You okay, Rach? You seem off tonight." I forced a smile and congratulated him again on his acceptance, telling him how proud I was of his achievements, and meaning every word. My brother had never been part of the problem. He was simply the beneficiary of parents who could only see one path to success. "Take care of yourself," I told him, hugging him tightly. "And don't let them put too much pressure on you." He looked puzzled by the warning, but I was already walking away, stepping out into the Boston night with a clarity I had never possessed before. The walk from Beacon Hill to my apartment in Cambridge gave me time to process what had just happened. For the first time in my life, I understood exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy. I wasn't the daughter who had chosen a different path. I was the mistake who had refused to disappear quietly. The realization was devastating, but also strangely liberating. I no longer had to waste energy trying to earn something that would never be freely given. Instead, I could channel that energy into proving them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. The months following Michael's graduation party marked a transformation in both my personal resolve and professional trajectory. Instead of wallowing in the pain of my parents' rejection, I decided to use their words as fuel for something they would never be able to dismiss or minimize. If they saw me as a mistake, I would become the kind of mistake that reshapes entire industries and saves millions of lives in the process. My first step was to completely restructure my approach to innovation. Rather than developing individual devices for specific problems, I began working on something far more ambitious, a comprehensive platform that could democratize medical diagnostics globally. Using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and breakthrough sensor technology, I envisioned a system that could bring advanced medical capabilities to any location in the world, regardless of infrastructure or economic resources. The technical challenges were staggering. I needed to create diagnostic tools that were simultaneously sophisticated enough to compete with hospital-grade equipment, and simple enough to be operated by minimally trained personnel in remote locations. The AI algorithms had to be robust enough to function accurately across different populations, environmental conditions, and use cases. Most importantly, the entire system had to be affordable enough for widespread deployment in developing countries, while being profitable enough to sustain continued innovation and expansion. I assembled a team of brilliant engineers and medical professionals who shared my vision of accessible healthcare technology. Dr. Sarah Kim, a former Google AI researcher, became my chief technology officer. Dr. James Rodriguez, who had spent years providing medical care in refugee camps, served as our head of clinical applications. Maria Santos, a former McKinsey consultant with expertise in global health economics, took over business development. Together, we formed MedAccess Technologies, a company built on the foundation of my parents' dismissal, but driven by the potential to save lives on a scale they had never imagined. The early months were brutal. We worked 18-hour days in a converted warehouse in Somerville, surviving on determination and the conviction that we were building something revolutionary. I invested every penny of my savings from previous ventures, maxed out credit cards, and sold my apartment to fund initial development. When traditional investors showed polite interest but ultimately passed on our vision, I found funding through unconventional sources. Impact investors focused on global health, tech entrepreneurs who understood the disruptive potential, and even a few forward-thinking government grants. Our breakthrough came during month 8 of development. Dr. Kim's team had been working on pattern recognition algorithms that could analyze blood samples, saliva, breath, and other biological indicators to detect dozens of conditions simultaneously. The challenge was processing power, creating AI sophisticated enough to make accurate diagnoses while running on hardware cheap enough for global deployment. The solution emerged from an unexpected source: gaming technology. By adapting graphics processing units designed for video games, we could create portable diagnostic stations with unprecedented analytical capabilities at a fraction of traditional costs. The first successful field test occurred in a clinic outside Nairobi, Kenya. Our prototype device, roughly the size of a briefcase, successfully diagnosed tuberculosis, malaria, HIV, and several other conditions with accuracy rates exceeding 95%. More importantly, local healthcare workers learned to operate the system in under 2 hours of training. When test results began coming in, showing we could provide laboratory-quality diagnostics in locations that had never had access to such technology, I knew we had created something that could fundamentally change global healthcare delivery. Word of our success began spreading through networks of international health organizations, medical journals, and technology publications. The World Health Organization invited us to present our technology at their annual Global Health Summit. Doctors Without Borders requested pilot programs for refugee camps across 3 continents. Tech industry publications started referring to our platform as the iPhone of medical diagnostics, a comparison that both thrilled and motivated our entire team. But the real validation came when major pharmaceutical companies and medical device manufacturers began approaching us, not as competitors, but as potential partners. Johnson & Johnson offered a strategic partnership for global distribution. Siemens wanted to license our AI technology for their existing diagnostic equipment. Google's health division proposed a collaboration that would integrate our platform with their global health initiatives. Each conversation reinforced that we had built something truly revolutionary, something that could scale from village clinics to major hospitals worldwide. The media attention intensified throughout our second year. Medical journals published papers about our diagnostic accuracy rates. Technology publications featured our AI innovations. Business magazines wrote about our disruptive business model and potential for massive global impact. But I remained focused on the mission rather than the recognition, knowing that success would be measured in lives saved rather than headlines generated. As MedAccess Technologies grew from a startup to a legitimate force in the medical technology industry, I couldn't help but think about my parents' assessment of my work as impractical idealism. We were now operating in 12 countries, had diagnosed over 50,000 patients, and were on track to prevent thousands of deaths through early detection of treatable conditions. The mistake they had whispered about was becoming the kind of innovation that medical historians would study for decades. By the beginning of 2023, MedAccess Technologies had achieved something unprecedented in the medical device industry. Our diagnostic platform was operating in over 30 countries, had processed more than 500,000 patient analyses, and was being hailed by international health organizations as one of the most significant advances in global health technology in decades. But the recognition that would ultimately force my parents to confront their assessment of me was still building momentum behind the scenes. The first major signal came when the Gates Foundation announced MedAccess as the recipient of their Grand Challenge in Global Health Award, recognizing our platform as having revolutionary potential to eliminate health disparities between developed and developing nations. The $50 million grant was accompanied by partnerships with major international organizations and government health agencies. Suddenly, our technology wasn't just impressive. It was being positioned as a cornerstone of future global health policy. I maintained minimal contact with my family during this period, exchanging polite holiday greetings and congratulations on Michael's continued success in his surgical residency. My parents seemed comfortable with this distance, occasionally asking vague questions about my business ventures when forced social interactions required acknowledgement of my existence. They had no idea that the daughter they considered a mistake was building a company that would soon be valued at over $1 billion. The transformation in industry perception was remarkable. Medical conferences that had once relegated our presentations to obscure time slots now featured our technology in keynote addresses. University medical schools began incorporating case studies of our diagnostic platform into their curricula. Most significantly, venture capital firms that had previously shown little interest in global health applications were now competing aggressively to invest in MedAccess, driving valuations to levels that even surprised our own board of directors. Dr. Rodriguez, our head of clinical applications, brought particularly exciting news from the field. Our platform had successfully identified and helped treat several disease outbreaks before they could develop into major public health crises. In Uganda, we detected an emerging cholera outbreak 6 weeks before traditional surveillance systems would have identified it, allowing local authorities to implement containment measures that prevented thousands of infections. In Bangladesh, our AI algorithms identified a new strain of drug-resistant tuberculosis that required immediate attention from international health agencies. These successes generated attention from an unexpected source, the Nobel Committee for Medicine. While we weren't being considered for the prize itself, committee members began referencing our work in discussions about the future of medical diagnostics and global health innovation. Academic papers started citing our research as foundational work that would influence medical practice for generations. The recognition was building towards something significant, though I couldn't have predicted exactly what form that recognition would ultimately take. Maria Santos, our business development head, informed me that several major media outlets were preparing comprehensive features about MedAccess and its impact on global health. Forbes had been particularly persistent, requesting extensive interviews and access to our field operations for what they described as a major cover story about innovation in healthcare technology. Their interest seemed focused not just on our technology, but on the personal story behind the company's creation and my unconventional path to becoming a major force in medical innovation. The interview process with Forbes was intensive and comprehensive. They sent reporters to our field operations in Kenya, interviewed our technical team about AI breakthroughs, and spoke with healthcare workers around the world who used our diagnostic platform daily. They were particularly interested in my background, my parents' academic credentials, and the contrast between my unconventional entrepreneurial path and my family's traditional medical establishment roots. I answered their questions honestly but carefully, focusing on the technology and its impact rather than personal family dynamics. As spring approached, I began receiving invitations to speak at increasingly prestigious venues. The World Economic Forum requested a keynote address about the future of global health technology. Harvard Medical School, my brother Michael's institution, invited me to deliver their annual innovation lecture. The irony wasn't lost on me that the medical establishment my parents revered was now seeking insights from the daughter they had dismissed as a mistake. The most significant indicator that something major was building came when I received a call from the Forbes editorial team. They wanted to schedule a professional photo shoot and mentioned that their cover story about MedAccess would be published in their upcoming Innovators Under 35 special issue. The photographer they sent was the same one who had shot covers featuring tech industry giants and Nobel Prize winners. As I posed for pictures in our Somerville laboratory, surrounded by the diagnostic equipment that was changing lives around the world, I couldn't help but think about how far I had traveled from that devastating night when my parents had dismissed me as their one mistake. The Forbes team mentioned that their article would be published in early June, coinciding with several major medical conferences where our technology would be featured prominently. They seemed confident that the story would generate significant attention both within the medical community and in broader business and technology circles. I agreed to their publication timeline, having no idea that their cover story would arrive at precisely the moment when it would have maximum impact on the family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. The Forbes magazine arrived on a Tuesday morning in June 2023, exactly 4 years after my brother's graduation party and my father's devastating whisper. I was in my office at MedAccess headquarters when Maria Santos burst through the door, holding the magazine with an expression of pure elation. "Rachel, you need to see this," she said, placing the issue on my desk. There, on the cover of one of the world's most influential business publications, was my photograph above the headline, "America's Greatest Innovator: How Rachel Thompson is Revolutionizing Global Healthcare." The cover story was everything the Forbes team had promised, and more. 6 pages of detailed analysis about MedAccess technologies, our diagnostic platform, and what the magazine called the most significant advancement in accessible medical care since the discovery of antibiotics. They had interviewed leading medical experts, global health officials, and technology analysts, all of whom positioned our work as fundamentally transformative for the future of healthcare delivery worldwide. But the personal element of the story was what would ultimately matter most for my family dynamics. Forbes had crafted a narrative about the unconventional innovator who had chosen a different path from her distinguished medical family, ultimately achieving recognition that transcended traditional academic prestige. They described me as the entrepreneur who proved that disrupting established systems could be more impactful than following them, and noted that my technology was reaching more patients annually than most major hospital systems. The magazine's impact was immediate and overwhelming. My phone began ringing constantly with interview requests from major news networks, speaking invitations from medical conferences, and collaboration proposals from international organizations. CNN wanted me for their morning show. The BBC requested an interview about the future of global health technology. Harvard Business School invited me to be their commencement speaker for the following year. More significantly, the medical establishment that had once seemed indifferent to my work was now seeking my involvement at the highest levels. The World Health Organization offered me a position on their Strategic Advisory Committee. The National Institutes of Health requested my input on future research priorities. Johns Hopkins, the institution where my brother was training, invited me to join their innovation board and help shape the next generation of medical technology development. But the call that would force the ultimate confrontation with my family came from an unexpected source: my brother Michael. His voice was excited but confused when he reached me that Wednesday afternoon. "Rachel, I don't understand why you didn't tell us," he began. "My attending physicians have been talking about your Forbes cover all week. They're saying you're one of the most important innovators in medical technology today. The department head asked me if I could arrange an introduction because they want to explore partnerships with MedAccess." I explained to Michael that our parents had never shown genuine interest in my work, that I had learned to keep my professional achievements separate from family interactions to avoid their dismissive responses. His silence on the other end of the line was telling. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Rachel, I think there are some conversations our family needs to have. Would you be willing to come to dinner on Sunday? Mom and Dad have been asking about you since the magazine came out." The Sunday dinner invitation represented everything I had once desperately wanted: recognition, inclusion, acknowledgement that my choices had been valid. But now, sitting in my office surrounded by evidence of MedAccess's global impact, I realized that my parents' approval had become irrelevant to my sense of self-worth. Still, I agreed to attend, curious to see how they would attempt to reconcile their past dismissal with my current undeniable success. I arrived at the Beacon Hill brownstone carrying a copy of the Forbes magazine, not to gloat, but to have visual evidence of what they had failed to see or support. The house looked exactly the same, but the atmosphere was dramatically different. My parents greeted me with an awkwardness that spoke volumes about their discomfort with this new reality, where their mistake daughter had achieved recognition they couldn't dismiss or minimize. Dinner conversation was stilted and artificial as my parents attempted to navigate this unprecedented situation. They asked careful questions about MedAccess, about my work with international organizations, about the technology that was being praised by experts worldwide. Their tone was respectful but strained, as if they were interviewing a successful stranger rather than talking with their daughter. The moment of truth came during dessert, when my father cleared his throat and attempted to address the elephant in the room. "Rachel, we want you to know how proud we are of your achievements," he began, his voice formal and uncomfortable. "Your work is clearly having significant impact, and we may not have fully understood or supported your path as much as we should have." The careful, diplomatic language was exactly what I had expected, an attempt to rewrite history without acknowledging the depth of their rejection or the pain it had caused. But I was no longer the daughter who needed their validation or feared their disapproval. "Dad," I replied calmly, "I heard what you said about me at Michael's graduation party 4 years ago. You called me the one mistake you made. I want you to understand that those words didn't destroy me. They freed me." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. My mother's face went pale as she realized I had overheard their private conversation. My father's expression cycled through surprise, embarrassment, and something approaching shame. Michael looked confused, clearly unaware of what had transpired that night. "Your assessment was wrong," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "not because I needed your approval to validate my choices, but because you fundamentally misunderstood what innovation and impact actually look like. While you were celebrating traditional paths to success, I was building technology that will save millions of lives and change how medical care is delivered globally. The mistake wasn't having a daughter who chose a different path. The mistake was failing to recognize the value of that path until the rest of the world made it impossible to ignore. I stood up from the table, placed the Forbes magazine in front of them, and looked directly at my father. "I forgive you for not seeing my potential," I said. "But I want you to understand that your opinion about my worth stopped mattering the moment I realized my value wasn't determined by your ability to recognize it." The aftermath of that dinner conversation marked the beginning of a fundamentally different relationship between my family and me. The shift wasn't immediate or entirely comfortable, but it represented a recognition that old dynamics could no longer be sustained in the face of undeniable evidence about the path I had chosen. In the weeks following our confrontation, my parents made several attempts to rebuild our relationship on terms that acknowledged my achievements. My mother called to ask detailed questions about MedAccess's work in refugee camps, showing genuine interest in the humanitarian impact of our technology. My father sent articles about artificial intelligence in medicine, attempting to demonstrate his newfound appreciation for the field I had pioneered. These gestures, while imperfect, represented more engagement with my work than they had shown in my entire adult life. The broader recognition of MedAccess's impact continued to accelerate throughout 2023. The United Nations selected our diagnostic platform as a cornerstone technology for their Sustainable Development Goals related to global health access. Time magazine named me to their annual list of the world's most influential people. Most significantly, the Nobel Committee for Medicine announced that our AI diagnostic algorithms would be studied as a potential model for future medical innovation prizes. But the personal validation I treasured most came from unexpected sources. Healthcare workers in remote clinics sent videos showing how our technology had enabled them to save lives that would have been lost without access to advanced diagnostics. A young doctor in Bangladesh wrote to tell me that our platform had helped her diagnose rare genetic conditions in children who could now receive treatment. A nurse in rural Kenya explained how our AI system had detected early-stage cancer in a patient who was subsequently cured through prompt intervention. These stories reminded me daily that the path I had chosen, the one my parents had dismissed as impractical idealism, was creating tangible, measurable impact on human lives around the world. The Forbes recognition was gratifying, but the knowledge that MedAccess was preventing suffering and death in places where advanced medical care had never been available provided a sense of purpose that transcended any personal vindication. My relationship with Michael evolved in particularly positive ways. He began incorporating discussions about accessible medical technology into his surgical training, exploring how advanced diagnostics could be integrated into traditional medical practice. We started meeting regularly to discuss the intersection of traditional medicine and innovative technology, conversations that enriched both of our professional perspectives. He admitted that our parents' favoritism had been obvious and unfair, and he expressed admiration for my persistence in pursuing a vision they had failed to understand or support. As MedAccess continued to grow and expand its global reach, I reflected often on the journey from that devastating whisper to this moment of recognition and impact. The pain of being dismissed as a mistake had been genuine and lasting, but it had also provided the motivation to prove that innovation often comes from those who refuse to accept conventional limitations on what's possible. The company now employs over 400 people, operates in 45 countries, and has processed more than 2 million diagnostic analyses. We're developing next-generation technology that will make advanced medical care accessible in even the most remote locations on Earth. More importantly, we're training a new generation of healthcare workers who understand that technology can be a bridge between privilege and need, between advanced medical knowledge and the communities that need it most. The Forbes cover story remains framed in my office, not as a trophy of personal vindication, but as a reminder that recognition often comes to those who persist in pursuing important work, regardless of whether others initially understand or support their vision. The magazine's description of me as America's greatest innovator matters less than the knowledge that our technology continues to save lives and expand access to medical care for populations that had been marginalized by traditional healthcare systems. My parents and I have settled into a relationship characterized by mutual respect rather than the desperate need for approval that had once defined my connection to them. They attend MedAccess public events and speak proudly about my work to their colleagues, though I suspect they still don't fully understand the technological innovations that drive our success. That's acceptable to me now. Their comprehension was never necessary for my achievements to be meaningful or my choices to be valid. Have you ever been told you were a mistake by someone whose opinion you valued? Have you found the strength to transform that rejection into motivation for achieving something meaningful? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if this journey of turning family dismissal into world-changing innovation resonated with you. Sometimes the people who believe in us least become the inspiration for our greatest achievements, not because we need their approval, but because their limitations motivate us to transcend every boundary they thought defined our potential.